Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are in 1 Kings chapter 8. We've been studying the reign of Solomon. When you read the Bible, most of the men that you read, the writers, the men that are featured in here, you can even say women. There are a few women. We went like Deborah's purpose, okay? Mary's purpose, obviously, right? But most of the men that are featured have a specific purpose. Abraham, the covenant, Isaac, right? Joseph was to save Israel during the time of famine. Moses to deliver the Israelites from slavery and the giving of the law. Joshua was to bring the people into the promised land. So you can see everyone has a purpose. David had a purpose, establish the kingdom. And Solomon's purpose was to build the temple of God, build the temple. And so 480 years after the Israelites came out of Egypt, he commenced his building, which the temple itself took 7 years. His palace, you can also say his palace plus city hall, his palace, meaning the hall of judgment for him, which was spectacular, took 13 years. Of course, this is a artist rendition, sort of based upon that long, tedious chapter that I read in the construction. So if you are an architect, engineer, based upon that information, you can come up with what the temple might have looked at. So after 7 years of construction, and then I think he's going to dedicate this temple, and God is going to show up in this dedication. Okay, so let's get into it. So remember, verse 1 says, at that time Solomon assembled the elders of Israel, all the tribal heads, all the ancestral leaders of the Israelites, before him at Jerusalem, in order to bring the ark of the Lord's covenant from the city of David, that is Zion. Now, kind of interesting here, we have a biblical definition of Zion. Now, you hear Zion all the time in our society. Zionism, and that's what a lot of words they get added on to, right? The definition themselves are not necessarily what is meant. So, for example, during the rise of the Third Reich, Germany, Zionism was a curse. They used it as a curse, simply Judaism or Jews. Now, obviously, it is that, but as you can see, the city of David is Zion. And so verse 2 says, so all of the men of Israel were assembled in the presence of King Solomon in the 7th month of Ethanim at the festival. Now, let me say one more word about Zion or Zionism, because it's throughout the scriptures here. If you wanted to attach Judaism to it, you can. Zionism in and of itself is not necessarily, I think, a proper definition of it. As you can see, it is the city of David more so. All right. Verse 3, all the elders of Israel came, and the priest picked up the ark. Now, remember the ark of God, which was constructed by Moses. we haven't heard too much about the tabernacle since Israel came into Israel. You could assume because it was a portable worship center that it could be moved around because it moved during the 40-year wilderness of the first generation that came out of Egypt, Moses' generation, right? I think it's safe to assume that the tabernacle rested in the city of David at this time, where the place of worship would have been, and not too much of it, what you would find, not too much. What you find also during this next phase of Israel's history, which is about a 500-year period, and even the 480 years since they came out, they weren't always as faithful to do what God had told them to do, like the Passover. We're going to see that in one respect, the Passover hadn't been celebrated. The Sabbath days that God told them to do, they're not going to do that. So, but the priests, and this is going to be a very glorious time because, after this dedication, you will have a centralized house of God. Okay. Verse 4 again, the priests and the Levites brought the ark of the Lord to the tent of meetings and the holy utensils that were in the tent. And by the way, the priests were the only ones who could do that. Verse 5, King Solomon and the entire congregation of Israel who had gathered around him and were with him in front of the ark were sacrificing sheep and cattle that could not be counted or numbered because there were so many. Now, I told you in one of the studies, Solomon offered a lot of sheep, a lot of cattle, a lot of livestock got slaughtered under Solomon's rule. And even here, you notice it couldn't be counted. Now, what's interesting about this too, if you really want to do a deep dive into the thought, think how much blood, think how much carcasses there. So they slaughtered a lot. Verse 6. The priest brought the ark of the Lord's covenant to its place, into the inner sanctuary of the temple, to the most holy beneath the wings of the cherubim. For the cherubim were spreading their wings over the place of the ark, so that the cherubims covered the ark and its poles from above. The poles were so long that the ends were seen from the holy place in front of the inner sanctuary, but they were not seen from the outside of the sanctuary, and they are there to this day. So kind of interesting, whoever's writing this, so this is after the fact, he's writing the historical accounting. So now, and he's writing after the fact, so whoever it was still alive at the time of this writing here. As I said, some people seem to think that this is the Ezra the scribe. I don't think that it is by this statement. As I said, you hear these kind of statements right here, but I don't think that this is. Because notice, if it was Ezra was post-Babylonian exile. So what you have is that from this date, around this time, is going to be another 500 years before the Babylonian exile. Then you're going to have 70 years of the Babylonian exile, and then you come to the time of Ezra. So if he's writing this some 500 to 600 years later, I want to say that can't happen because the temple was completely destroyed. I'm going to come out of this for a moment to show you. The temple was completely destroyed. So this is what we would have seen. The temple was completely destroyed. So all of this here, all of what you see right there, this kind of cut out sectional here. All of this was destroyed. So when the writer says it is seen to this day, it would have to have been sometime before the Babylonian exile. All right. Also, if you notice, just kind of a picture here, if you look at towards the back, you see the wings, the two cherubim wings there that's covering the ark. You cannot really make it out, at least I can't. But that's what would have been the inner sanctuary, the holies of holies. Okay, and so remember, they're kind of dedicating all of this right now. You can say inaugurating all of this. All right, so verse 9. Nothing was in the ark except the two stone tablets that Moses put there in Hebron, where the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites when they came out of the land of Egypt. Now this would have been the second set of stone tablets. Remember, Moses destroyed the first two when the Israelites sinned in their immense idolatry and debauchery, the golden calf incident. Verse 10, when the priest came out of the holy place, the cloud filled the temple, and because of the cloud, the priests were not able to continue ministering, for the glory of the Lord filled the temple. Now, this glory cloud is God's presence. Now, I'm going to some of you all that think that you are experiencing the presence of God in church services, you're really not. You are really just experiencing an emotional reaction to your prayer, to your worship, to your singing. The presence of God, and the word presence always means just that, presence. And so you cannot say the person is present and cannot be seen or felt or both. So in this case, when we say God's presence, it showed up in the sense of a cloud, a glory cloud that was bright, thick, but God's presence in it was so strong, so awesome, so overpowering that the people could not stand in his presence. Okay? So in other words, you will always know, and it will be without a doubt when God's presence shows up anytime. Now that said, some of you, when you say, "Oh, I felt God's presence when I went to church today," no, you didn't. Well, no, you really didn't. Okay, you might have had a reaction to your prayer, reaction to a thought, reaction. It was an emotional reaction, but it wasn't the glory of God. Now, another thing is that God is showing up to validate, not only to commemorate, to consecrate, but to validate. This is his place of worship. All right, so verse 12, then Solomon said, the Lord said that he would dwell in thick darkness. I have indeed built an exalted temple for you, a place for your dwelling forever. The king turned around and blessed the entire congregation of Israel while they were standing. He said, may the Lord God of Israel be praised. He spoke directly to my father, David, and he has fulfilled the promise. By his power, he said, since the day I brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I have not chosen a city to build a temple in among any of the tribes of Israel, so that my name would be there. But I've chosen David to rule my people Israel. And it was the desire of my father David to build a temple for the name of Yahweh, the God of Israel. But the Lord God said to my father David, since it was your desire to build a temple for my name, you have done well to have this desire, yet you are not the one to build it. Instead, your son, your own offspring, will build it for my name. Now, this is kind of interesting if you remember the story. And I oftentimes think about this because we can have desires that we want to do something, but it's not necessarily God's will that we do it. And David found out, he was heartbroken over it, but he says, "Thy will be done." Okay, but you know David would have built a spectacular temple, but he surrendered to the will of God, and then now you see Solomon is building this great temple. Verse 20. The Lord has fulfilled what he promised. I have taken the place of my father David, and I sit on the throne of Israel as the Lord promised, and I built the temple for the name of Yahweh, the God of Israel. So this is a fulfillment. Actually, remember, God had prophesied. God had specifically told David that Solomon. What is interesting about Solomon, remember that he is the son of adultery. So that's kind of interesting. Bathsheba, remember, was an adulterous affair, and one of David's darkest marks upon his record. Okay, he was a man after God's own heart, but that was the bad. But God is merciful, and God forgave him. Now, what is interesting is that Solomon, being the result of that, the first child between David and Bathsheba died as a result of David's sin. And so now Solomon, right, not only survives but rises to rule Israel, builds God a temple. Verse 21, I have provided a place there for the ark where the Lord's covenant is that he made with our ancestors when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. Now I'm going to kind of stop it right here and pick up with David's prayer next time. And this is a very long chapter too, by the way, but I'll get into it. And I'm going to try to do this and chapter 8 next time. All right. So let me come out of this. But we'll go back to the temple. This is what he's dedicating. Okay. Like I say, I don't know if it looked exactly like this. Of course, the other picture there of the temple, artist renditions, of course, probably didn't look as spectacular, but also keep this in mind that David's God, remember, Solomon is operating off of God's wisdom, that he is operating, with the wisdom of God. And it's, again, so all right, so we'll pick it up, guys. Don't forget to like and share this video here, and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. Hit that subscribe button. Send the comments if you wish. All comments are welcome. All right, guys. See you in the next study.